The Disappearance at St. Mary's. The Nun Who Vanished Without a Trace, 1994. Boston, Massachusetts, USA. It was an April evening in 1994 when St. Mary's Convent, a quiet brick sanctuary tucked behind Beacon Hill, prepared for its nightly vespers. The sky outside carried the calm of early spring, soft drizzle, faint light, the sound of city life fading beyond the stone walls. Inside, the rhythm was older than the city itself. Prayer, reflection, silence. Sister Catherine Doyle had been part of that rhythm for 9 years. Those who knew her described her as precise yet gentle, always early to prayer and last to leave the chapel. She managed the convent's archives, a room filled with letters, baptism records, and memories no one else bothered to read. That day had begun like every other. Morning mass, community meal, silence until noon. But several of the sisters remembered that Catherine seemed distracted, pausing at windows, glancing down corridors, as if listening for something she couldn't place. By late afternoon, she had finished cataloging parish records in the lower wing. At 7 p.m., she joined the choir for Vespers. At 7:38 p.m., witnesses saw her kneel in the fourth pew from the altar. The lights dimmed for evening prayer. When they brightened again, she was gone. No one heard a sound. At first, the sisters thought she'd gone to the washroom or stepped outside for air. But minutes turned to hours, and the pattern of the convent, the perfect clockwork of discipline, stumbled. By midnight, Father Andrew McKenna, the parish confessor, phoned the Boston Police Department. His voice on record sounded calm, but his statement the next day contradicted itself twice. Investigators arrived before dawn. They found the chapel door locked from inside, no sign of forced entry. Catherine's personal items were intact. Rosary, shoes neatly placed beneath her bed, habit folded on a chair. Only one thing was missing, a small key to the confessional booth, kept exclusively by Catherine and Father Andrew. Detective Laura Keene, then a 28-year-old rookie, led the search of the convent grounds. She later described the building as a maze of whispers, with that creaked like speech, corridors that breathed. Forensics found a faint smear of blood on the marble floor near the altar rail, but tests were inconclusive. It could have been decades old, or only hours. By sunrise, the police widened their search beyond the chapel. Dogs traced her scent down to the basement archives, and then lost it near a sealed door marked Maintenance Access B2. When maintenance was called to open it, the lock was new, installed only a week earlier. No record showed who had ordered the change. Meanwhile, reporters began to gather outside St. Mary's. The Archdiocese released a short statement calling it a matter of prayer and ongoing cooperation with authorities. But privately, officers reported tension. The sisters were cooperative, yet fearful. Some whispered that Catherine had been under spiritual strain, though no one explained what that meant. In her small notebook, found in her room, she'd written a single line the night before she vanished. The truth hides beneath the hymn. That sentence would become the cornerstone of every theory that followed. When detectives reviewed the convent's internal logs, they found one irregularity. An access note showing the confessional booth was opened at 7:46 p.m., 8 minutes after Catherine was last seen. The door should have been locked, and the only other person with a key, Father Andrew, claimed he was at his rectory across the courtyard at the time. The next morning, police questioned him formally. His answers were steady, but his hand shook. He admitted that Catherine had confided something to him during confession earlier that week, something she feared might bring harm to the church. When asked to elaborate, he invoked priest-penitent privilege and refused further detail. The investigation began to divide along two lines. Those who believed Catherine had fled due to emotional or spiritual turmoil, and those who suspected foul play. Forensic teams searched the convent's garden pond, drainage tunnels, and basement foundations. Nothing. No footprints, no fibers, no signs of struggle. By day 5, media headlines read, "None missing, police mystified." The church tightened its silence. Access to internal records was denied, pending canonical review. When detectives subpoenaed the confession booth's old analog recording system, the device was gone, removed overnight by diocesan officials. They claimed it was obsolete equipment destined for disposal. Detective Keene later said that was the moment she realized the case might never see daylight. Inside St. Mary's, fear turned to ritual. Nuns began leaving candles near Catherine's seat, praying daily for her safe return. But behind closed doors, some whispered about strange noises. The soft click of her rosary, the rustle of her habit, echoes of movement when no one was there. For investigators, superstition meant nothing. They followed evidence. But as the days stretched into weeks, evidence vanished almost as quickly as Catherine had. And yet, one question lingered. What was on the missing confessional tape? Day 6 brought a break, or what looked like one. A groundskeeper named Michael Tierney reported seeing a figure matching Sister Catherine's description near the edge of the Charles River around 2 a.m., 2 nights after her disappearance. She appeared disoriented, barefoot, and clutching something metallic in her right hand. But when he called out, she turned, stared directly toward him, and stepped back into the fog. Police combed the area. No footprints, no fibers, no trace. The sighting was never confirmed, but the location was less than half a mile from St. Mary's. Behind closed doors, internal tensions deepened. Parish records revealed that the convent had recently received an anonymous donation, $25,000, in cash, labeled only for Catherine's silence. The archdiocese dismissed it as a misfiled contribution, but detectives weren't convinced. Detective Keene pressed for interviews with each sister. Most described Catherine as deeply faithful, though reserved. One, Sister Margaret, broke into tears during questioning, saying only she found something she wasn't meant to see. When investigators asked what that meant, Sister Margaret refused to elaborate. Catherine's last recorded assignment had been reviewing the church's archives from the early 1970s, specifically transfer papers for clergy reassigned between parishes. The records she'd been studying were missing from the archive room. 1 week after she vanished, a letter addressed to the Boston Globe arrived at their newsroom. It contained a single typed sentence. The walls of St. Mary's remember more than prayers. Police traced the envelope's postmark to a box 3 blocks from the convent. No fingerprints, no camera footage. By the second week, the investigation reached a standstill. The church's cooperation waned. Reporters began speculating about corruption, secret transfers, even hidden tunnels beneath the convent. None were proven, but one photograph, taken by forensic technicians the first night, would later reignite the case. It showed the confessional door closed, light filtering from within, and the faint outline of a hand pressed against the frosted glass. No one present that night recalled seeing it. Detective Keene would later say, "When I looked at that photo years later, I realized that wasn't Catherine's hand. It was too large, too defined, like someone had been standing inside the booth waiting." The case file was officially closed in 1995 as unresolved missing person. Yet, to this day, St. Mary's still keeps Catherine's pew empty, her name etched into the wood. And for many in Boston, her disappearance remains a wound left unhealed. Was Sister Catherine a victim of church secrecy, or did she uncover something she was never meant to? Either way, her story begins here, with one woman, one chapel, and one night when silence swallowed everything. Stay with us as we open Chapter 2, where the search turns inside the church itself, and secrets buried for decades begin to surface. Echoes in the chapel. The investigation begins. When daylight returned to St. Mary's, it brought more questions than answers. Reporters stood behind yellow tape, flashing cameras at the convent gates, while detectives combed through every corridor, searching for a trace of the missing nun. Boston police assigned a small task force to the case, led by Detective Laura Keene and supported by 2 veteran investigators from the Homicide Division. Although there was no evidence of murder, Keene insisted that a disappearance this contained means someone planned it. Inside the convent, the sisters moved like ghosts, soft, deliberate, careful. They avoided eye contact with the officers, whispering prayers between every question. The atmosphere wasn't just quiet, it was guarded. The first focus was the confessional booth. Technicians dusted for prints, finding multiple partial smudges but no clear match to Sister Catherine. The confessional's wooden panels showed faint scuff marks on the inside, as if something heavy had been dragged against it. And the seat, where penitents knelt, was slightly shifted off its frame. Detective Keen's partner, Officer Donnelly, noted that one screw from the grill panel was loose, as though it had been removed recently and replaced. Behind it, they discovered a hollow compartment, no bigger than a book. Empty. Keen asked to see the parish's security footage, only to learn the convent's small surveillance system had been offline for maintenance the entire week. The technician responsible couldn't produce a work order or logs showing who had shut it down. As for Father Andrew, he appeared visibly strained. He gave a brief statement. Sister Catherine was devoted, but she had become troubled. She confided fears, spiritual in nature. She spoke of voices and messages in the hymns. I told her to rest. That's all. When asked about the missing confessional key, he said he'd misplaced his days earlier. That coincidence did not go unnoticed. While investigators searched for physical evidence, local media leaned into speculation. Headlines read, "Faith, Fear, and a Missing Nun. Vanished in a Chapel. Miracle or Murder." The story gripped the nation. Talk shows debated whether the church was hiding something, or whether this was a case of psychological breakdown turned tragic. But then, something peculiar surfaced. A custodian named Gerald Watkins reported that 2 nights before Catherine disappeared, he had been cleaning the basement archives when he heard someone chanting. Not in prayer, but in Latin, low and rhythmic. The sound seemed to come from beyond the maintenance door marked B2. We tried to open it. It was locked. The next morning, he mentioned it to Sister Catherine. She asked him to describe what he heard. After he did, she went silent, thanked him, and walked away. That was the last time he saw her. Investigators pried open that same door. Behind it lay an old staircase descending into a small sub-basement, once used as a coal room. Dust filled the air. On the far wall, they found faded chalk markings, symbols resembling crosses, circles, and lines of Latin text barely legible. Veritas in tenebris, truth in the darkness. Someone had drawn them long ago, or recently. The forensic team swept the area, finding one new footprint in the dust, matching a size smaller than Catherine's. Whatever was happening beneath St. Mary's, it wasn't new. Meanwhile, Catherine's family, Irish immigrants from Dorchester, pleaded for transparency. Her brother, Thomas Doyle, told reporters, "If the church truly believes she's safe, let them open every door, every record. Otherwise, I'll assume they're protecting someone." The Archdiocese released a carefully worded statement about preserving sacred privacy. To the public, that sounded like a cover-up. Detective Keen pressed on. She traced Catherine's research work and discovered that several priests listed in the missing 1970s transfer papers had faced past accusations of misconduct, records the church had quietly sealed decades ago. Had Catherine uncovered that truth? And if so, had she paid the price for it? Inside the convent, the tension grew unbearable. Some sisters began claiming they heard Catherine's voice during prayers. Others swore they saw her reflection in the glass of the chapel windows. Whether hallucination or haunting, the line between faith and fear was disappearing fast. One night, after police left for the day, a nun reported hearing the old confessional creak open by itself. Inside, she found Catherine's rosary, polished unbroken, and still warm to the touch. That evidence was logged and sealed, but it left a chilling question echoing in the darkened chapel. If Sister Catherine was gone, who placed it there? Walls of silence, secrets beneath the church. By the second week of Sister Catherine Doyle's disappearance, the investigation had split into 2 realities, the one the police could see and the one the church refused to show. Detective Laura Keen stood outside the heavy oak doors of the Archdiocese headquarters, Boston's spring wind snapping her coat collar. Inside, church officials were holding a meeting about media management regarding the missing nun. Keen wasn't invited, but she was there anyway, demanding access to the transfer files Catherine had been working on. When the doors opened, a man in a black cassock stepped forward, Monsignor Raymond Harlan, head of the diocesan archives. He greeted her politely, but his eyes carried fatigue, or maybe fear. "Detective," he said, "this matter concerns internal church affairs. You must understand, there are boundaries even faith cannot cross." Keene replied evenly, "I'm not here for faith, Monsignor. I'm here for truth." Inside the police station, the tone was shifting. The department had received anonymous tips claiming that Catherine's disappearance tied to older scandals buried by the church. But none of the tips were verifiable. Some emails came from untraceable accounts. Others referenced cryptic biblical verses. Isaiah 29 verse 15, "Woe to those who hide their plans from the Lord." Keene's instincts told her this wasn't coincidence. She returned to the convent for a second round of questioning. The sisters were visibly shaken. Many avoided eye contact. Some quietly refused to speak at all, citing orders from higher clergy. One of them, Sister Agnes, finally broke the silence. She said Catherine had confided in her about discovering documents that didn't belong to St. Mary's, hidden within the archive's oldest ledgers. Catherine believed the papers proved that priests accused of misconduct in the 1970s had been reassigned under false names. Agnes said she urged Catherine to destroy the files, but Catherine had refused. She said truth must answer to God before it answers to men. The next day, Catherine vanished. When Keene asked to see the archives, Agnes hesitated. Then she reached into her sleeve and handed the detective a folded page, aged, yellowed, torn along one edge. At the top, a name, Father Alan Reese. Transferred, 1973. No destination listed. Keene took it straight to forensics. The ink was authentic. The paper matched 1970s ledger stock, and the handwriting was consistent with original archdiocesan records. It was proof that Catherine had indeed uncovered something real. But within 24 hours, the archdiocese filed a formal injunction against further intrusion into ecclesiastical property, stalling the investigation. Meanwhile, something strange happened inside the convent itself. Maintenance workers reported that light bulbs near the chapel flickered continuously, even after replacement. The air smelled faintly of burning incense, though none was lit. And in one of the confessional's wooden panels, new scratches appeared overnight, forming 3 short vertical lines, like a signature or a warning. Father Andrew began to unravel. During a routine visit from church officials, he confessed privately to hearing Catherine's voice in the early mornings. She whispered only one word, "down." When pressed, he refused to say more. But his behavior grew erratic. He avoided the confessional entirely, slept in his office, and reportedly destroyed several handwritten sermons. Detective Keene, hearing of his decline, requested another interview. She found him pale, trembling, clutching a small silver crucifix. He looked up and whispered, "You think she's dead, don't you? You're wrong. The church buries more than bodies." Within 48 hours, Father Andrew disappeared. His car was found near the edge of the Charles River. Driver's door open, ignition off, footprints leading toward the water. No body recovered. No sign of struggle. The press went wild. Second disappearance rocks St. Mary's. Police feared a copycat or a desperate act. But inside the department, Keene started to believe the disappearances were connected. Not random, not supernatural, but systemic. Someone was removing witnesses. She called for federal assistance. The archdiocese issued a statement calling such involvement unnecessary. Public opinion was turning. Protesters gathered outside the convent gates, holding candles and signs reading, "Where is Sister Catherine?" and "The Church knows." Inside St. Mary's, the remaining sisters prayed harder. But prayer had become a form of fear management. They began keeping doors open even during sleep, leaving lights burning through the night. And then came the discovery that would shake everything open again. A young officer, sweeping the sub-basement beneath the archives, found a hollow section in the stone wall. Inside was a hidden metal box wrapped in old linen. When forensics opened it, they found 3 items. A small silver cross, a faded photograph of Catherine Doyle standing beside Father Andrew, both smiling, and a cassette tape labeled simply, Vespers, April 3rd, 1994. The missing recording from the confessional. The box had been sealed behind brick and mortar. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. As the tape was prepared for playback, Keene wrote in her report, "If this is what Catherine found, it may explain why she vanished. But if it's what I think it is, someone inside this church has been covering sins far older than we imagined." The tape began to play, and what they heard would turn St. Mary's from a mystery into a nightmare. The confessional tape, Secrets on Record. The cassette was old, its label handwritten in blue ink, Vespers, April 3rd, 1994. The same date, Sister Catherine vanished. The recording had survived decades, sealed behind stone, preserved like a confession meant to outlive its owner. In the small forensic audio lab, Detective Laura Keene and her team gathered around as the technician pressed play. A faint hiss filled the speakers. Then, the soft hum of an organ. Voices followed, female, melodic, distant. The sound of prayer. But beneath that harmony, a whisper. Faint, unsteady. Catherine's voice. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I've seen what should not exist in the house of God." Her tone was calm at first, but then faltered. Another voice entered, the confessor's, low and measured. "You must understand, sister, obedience is salvation. Some truths destroy faith." The dialogue grew distorted, as though the recorder itself resisted what came next. Catherine spoke again. "Then faith built on lies is already lost." The tape crackled violently, then went silent for nearly 20 seconds. When sound returned, only one thing was audible: the slow click of the confessional door closing, followed by a single phrase whispered almost too softly to catch. "The veil will tear." The technician froze the playback. The room stayed quiet. Detective Keene replayed the section 3 times. The voice delivering that final phrase wasn't Catherine's, and it didn't match Father Andrew's. Forensic analysis confirmed what everyone feared. There was a third voice on the tape. Male, deep, indeterminate accent, unknown identity. The revelation broke the case wide open. Keene ordered the convent locked down for a complete forensic sweep. Church officials protested, citing violation of ecclesiastical sanctity. She ignored them. The search began before dawn. Teams combed every inch of St. Mary's. Attics, crypts, basements. In one storage room, they found remnants of a decades-old sound system, wires running directly beneath the confessional booths. It appeared someone had modified the original design to record or transmit conversations. The system had been disconnected long before Catherine's disappearance, but the installation matched 1970s electrical schematics. When asked, Monsignor Harlan claimed ignorance. Yet, documents later recovered from diocesan archives showed his signature on the installation orders. Confronted, he said only, "Not everything recorded was meant for mortal ears." Meanwhile, the third voice on the tape was run through national databases. No match. But a breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. An elderly priest, Father Thomas O'Leary, retired and living in Maine, contacted the department after hearing about the recording on local news. He claimed he recognized the phrase, "the veil will tear." According to O'Leary, that phrase had once been associated with a secret disciplinary order within the church known informally as the custodians. Their duty was to preserve divine order by silencing spiritual chaos. It sounded cryptic, but the implication was chilling. If Catherine had uncovered something she shouldn't have, some evidence of past crimes or corruption, the custodians might have been the ones to ensure silence. Keene requested official Vatican cooperation. The answer came swiftly. No record of such an order exists. Still, Father O'Leary insisted. He recalled a visiting priest named Alan Reese, the same name on the transfer sheet Catherine found, who once spoke of cleansing the faith by removing the impure. O'Leary's memory placed Reese at St. Mary's in 1974, long before Catherine joined. But it meant one thing. The same name had reappeared 20 years later in her research, right before she vanished. Keene began piecing together a theory. What if Catherine discovered that Father Reese had been operating under multiple aliases across decades. What if he was still alive and present during her confession? She ordered a deep archival search through state and federal identity databases. A week later, the team located a man matching the physical description, now using the name Richard Hale, living quietly in rural New Hampshire. He'd served briefly as a chaplain before resigning under health reasons. Keene drove out to question him. The small house sat at the edge of a wooded property, blinds drawn, mailbox rusted. When she knocked, the door creaked open slightly, but no one answered. Inside, dust covered everything except a small wooden altar with a single candle burning. On it lay a framed photograph. Catherine Doyle, smiling in her habit. The next morning, when police returned with a warrant, the house was empty. All they found was a note on the table, written in careful cursive. The truth was never missing. It was buried alive. Fingerprint analysis came back inconclusive. That night, St. Mary's Chapel was struck by lightning. The fire department extinguished the flames quickly, but inside, the confessional booth was destroyed. And in the ashes, investigators found something no one could explain. Catherine's missing notebook, perfectly intact. The final page read, "If I vanish, it won't be by choice. Tell them to look where the hymns end." That phrase, "where the hymns end," would guide the next stage of the investigation. Detective Keene believed it meant something literal. The hymn books ended on the altar. The sound of music faded into the walls. Perhaps Catherine had hidden something behind them. The next morning, with court authorization, the investigative team dismantled the altar's wooden frame. Behind it, they found a hollow space, and inside, an iron lockbox sealed with wax. The church demanded immediate custody of it. Keene refused. Inside the lockbox was a collection of files dated between 1968 and 1976, dozens of internal church transfer orders and disciplinary memos, all marked confidential. Several names matched those Catherine had highlighted in her personal notes. At the bottom of the stack, one document bore a chilling signature, Father Alan Reese, alongside a second name written faintly in pencil, C. Doyle. She had signed it. No one knew why. That discovery changed everything. Catherine Doyle was no longer just a missing nun. She had become part of the evidence. In Chapter 5, the investigation collides with church authority as the hidden documents expose decades of buried secrets. And Detective Keene realizes that the closer she gets to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes to stay alive. The sacred and the damned, the church fights back. By the time dawn broke over Boston, the corridors of St. Mary's had turned into a war zone of silence and suspicion. Detectives worked under the uneasy gaze of priests, nuns, and Vatican observers who arrived unannounced, all insisting they were there to assist in matters of truth. But Detective Laura Keene knew better. They weren't there to help. They were there to contain. The discovery of the lockbox and Catherine Doyle's signature had rattled the diocese. By mid-morning, official letters arrived demanding that all ecclesiastical materials be returned to church custody immediately. Their argument: the documents were holy property. Keene's reply was simple: holy or not, it's evidence. That statement made headlines within 24 hours. Local newspapers ran front-page stories. The nun who vanished. Police clash with church over secret files. Public interest exploded. For the first time, Catherine Doyle's name became more than a whisper in faith circles. It became a national symbol of mystery and defiance. But behind the scenes, something darker was unfolding. That night, Keene received a call from an anonymous number. The voice on the line was male, calm, deliberate. "Detective Keene, if you value your faith, leave this case alone." The veil was not meant to be lifted. Then silence. The call was traced to a payphone outside a small chapel in Salem, Massachusetts. Security footage showed a man in priestly robes, face obscured by a hood. When police arrived, the chapel was empty, except for a single candle still burning beside an open Bible. A verse had been underlined in red ink: "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." John 1 verse 5. Back at headquarters, analysts began reviewing the contents of the recovered church files. What they found confirmed Catherine's worst fears. Several documents referenced an internal disciplinary network, the custodians, just as Father O'Leary had warned. The group's purpose: to discreetly handle theological infractions and containment of scandalous revelations. Most chilling were 3 memos from the early 1970s describing ritual containment procedures, cryptic directives involving confinement, silence, and spiritual purification. And attached to one memo was a single name: Sister C. Doyle. The date was March 1994, 1 month before her disappearance. That memo alone proved she had been marked for containment. But before Keene could secure the files for federal transfer, her evidence locker was broken into. Surveillance cameras showed nothing but static for 7 full minutes, the exact window of the theft. The lockbox was gone. All that remained was a small piece of parchment lying where it once sat. In faint ink it read, "There is no sin holier than silence." For Keene, that was the breaking point. She contacted Father O'Leary again, the retired priest who first mentioned the custodians. He agreed to meet in person, but insisted on a secluded location. They met that evening in a candlelit chapel at the edge of the Charles River. The wind howled through the broken stained glass as O'Leary spoke. "You must understand, Detective, this didn't begin with Catherine Doyle. The custodians have existed since the 1800s. Their task was never just to silence heresy. It was to erase it." He handed Keene an old photograph. It showed a group of priests standing in front of St. Mary's in 1972. Among them was a familiar face, Father Alan Reese, and behind him, barely visible in the corner, a young novice nun. The label on the back read, "Sister Catherine Doyle, 1974. "But that's impossible," Keene whispered. "She wasn't even born until 1958. She would have been 16. O'Leary's voice trembled. "She wasn't the first Catherine Doyle, Detective. There were others." The name was recycled. He explained that Catherine Doyle wasn't a person. It was an assumed name used by select nuns in a secret order of penitents who sought to uncover corruption within the church. Every generation had its own Catherine. Each one vanished under mysterious circumstances. And each time, the church erased their existence, purging records, closing parishes, renaming archives. Keene felt her stomach tighten. So, the woman we're looking for, she might have known all of this? O'Leary nodded slowly. She knew too much. She uncovered the truth about her predecessors, and the cost of knowing was erasure. He handed her a small key, old brass, ornate. This belonged to the first Catherine. It opened something beneath St. Mary's. She left instructions, passed through generations. The place is called the Crypt of the Redeemed. It's where they kept what they couldn't destroy. The following morning, Keene assembled a small trusted team and returned to St. Mary's. They followed the map O'Leary provided, a labyrinth of catacombs beneath the chapel. After nearly an hour, they found a sealed iron door marked with Latin inscription. Veritas abscondita sub cruce, truth hidden beneath the cross. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was thick, the walls lined with stone alcoves. Candles burned faintly, though no one had been there for decades. At the center stood a marble slab. On it rested a small wooden box with a silver cross embedded in its lid. Inside the box, a single rosary, a locket, and a rolled-up scroll wrapped in red ribbon. The locket contained a photograph, the same nun seen in the 1974 picture. On the back, "To the next Catherine, find where the hymns end." The scroll was written in a mix of Latin and English, signed Catherine Doyle, 1879. Its final line read, "Our sin was faith without truth. When the veil tears again, one of us must stay behind." As Keene read the words aloud, one of the candles flickered and went out. And from somewhere deep in the catacombs, a faint echo rose, a whisper of prayer. Her partner turned, flashlight trembling. "Did you hear that?" Keene nodded slowly. "Yeah, someone's down here." They followed the sound deeper into the dark, unaware that the truth Catherine sought was about to reveal itself, not through evidence or confession, but through something neither of them could explain. The ghost of St. Mary's whispers beneath the cross. The air in the catacombs was stale, heavy with centuries of incense, candle smoke, and something older, the unmistakable scent of rot. Detective Laura Keene's flashlight cut through the darkness like a thin blade, revealing rows of stone alcoves, each marked with Latin inscriptions and the faint carvings of crosses long eroded by time. The whispering had stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Keene's partner, Detective Ruiz, kept close behind, his hand resting on his sidearm, though they both knew bullets meant nothing down here. "You sure we should be doing this?" he muttered. "If Catherine was looking for the truth," Keene replied, "this is where it died." They moved deeper, past broken statues of saints and discarded hymnals turned to dust. The beam of light caught something carved into the wall, a faint symbol identical to the one etched on the lockbox from the confessional, a cross intertwined with an open eye. Ruiz shivered. "That symbol again. What does it mean?" "It means she was here," Keene whispered. A few meters ahead, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, circular, with a stone altar at its center. Melted candle wax dripped down like frozen tears, and on the altar, a single object rested under a layer of dust, a recorder. Old, identical to the one found behind the confessional. Keene crouched, pressing play. The tape hissed before a woman's voice broke through the static. "This is Sister Catherine Doyle. If anyone finds this recording, I'm not missing. I'm being erased." Ruiz froze. The voice was clear, emotional, defiant. "They told me my faith was my armor. But faith cannot protect you from men who hide their sins behind God. If I disappear, look beneath the altar. The truth is buried here." Static. Then, a soft hum, like distant chanting. Keene set the recorder down and stepped toward the altar. Using a crowbar, she pried up one of the floor tiles. Beneath it was a wooden panel sealed with wax and engraved with the same Latin phrase, Veritas abscondita sub cruce. She broke the seal. The smell that escaped was ancient and metallic, blood and candle smoke mixed into one. Inside the cavity lay a rusted metal chest, smaller than a shoebox. Within it were brittle papers, rosary beads, and a faded photograph. It was Catherine Doyle again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. 3 men stood behind her in priestly robes, faces obscured by shadow. In the background, the very altar where Keene now stood. "She took this picture down here," Ruiz said. "She knew we'd find it." Before Keene could respond, the air around them shifted. A cold draft swept through the chamber, snuffing out the candle Ruiz had lit earlier. Then came the sound, faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. Footsteps. They echoed from the far end of the tunnel, slow and deliberate, dragging across the stone floor. Keene raised her flashlight, pointing it toward the sound. Nothing. Just the endless black corridor. "Hello," she called out. "This is the Boston Police. Identify yourself." No answer. But the footsteps continued, closer now. Then the recorder, still on the altar, clicked by itself and began to play again. Only this time, it wasn't Catherine's voice. It was a man. The same deep tone heard on the first tape. "Why do you disturb the silence, detective?" Ruiz stumbled back, gun raised. "What the hell?" The voice continued, calm and taunting. She sought the truth. She found it, and the truth consumed her. "Will you be next?" Keene slammed the stop button, but the recording didn't stop. The tape kept spinning. "You can't silence what was sanctified by blood," the voice hissed. And then a loud bang echoed down the corridor. Ruiz swung his flashlight toward the sound. A door at the end of the catacomb, one they hadn't noticed before, had slammed shut on its own. When they approached, they found a name carved into the stone above it. C. Doyle. Behind that door was another small chamber, almost like a tomb. In the center, an open coffin. Inside it lay a skeleton wearing a nun's habit, perfectly preserved beneath glass. Pinned to its chest was a rosary identical to the one found in the previous crypt. But it wasn't the skeleton that made Keene's heart stop. It was the brass nameplate at the foot of the coffin. Sister Catherine Doyle, born 1847, died 1879. Ruiz turned to her. "That can't be right. The Sister Doyle we're investigating was born in 1958. Keene shook her head, trembling. "This isn't our Catherine. It's the first one." On the wall behind the coffin were dozens of carvings, each one a name, each ending in Doyle. Generations, all gone, all bearing the same name. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a pattern. Each time the church needed to bury the truth, another Catherine was chosen. Another soul was sacrificed beneath St. Mary's. Ruiz whispered, "This place is a graveyard of ghosts." Keene stared at the coffin, voice barely audible. "Then we're not just investigating a disappearance. We're investigating a legacy." Suddenly, the candles reignited on their own. Every flame in the crypt flared bright, illuminating the walls, and revealing fresh words that hadn't been there before. In red ink, scrawled across the stone, "The next Catherine has arrived." Ruiz stumbled back, terrified. "Jesus Christ." Keene turned, heart pounding, but before she could respond, her radio crackled with static. Then a voice, faint, female, desperate. "Laura, don't let them write your name." The signal died. It was Catherine's voice. Ruiz whispered, "We're leaving now." Keene nodded slowly, clutching the recorder, her flashlight flickering. As they climbed the narrow stairs back toward the surface, the sound of chanting rose from below, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. The voices of many women, all whispering the same phrase. Where the hymns end, and then silence. The forbidden files, power, silence, and a Vatican shadow. The morning after their descent into the catacombs, Boston woke to chaos. St. Mary's had become a fortress. Police tape surrounded the chapel, while reporters and parishioners pressed against barricades, demanding answers. Detective Laura Keene stood at the entrance, exhaustion etched across her face. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the voice again, Catherine's whisper through the static. "Don't let them write your name." That phrase haunted her, looping in her mind like a prophecy. Inside, the crime scene unit worked silently, documenting the newly discovered tombs beneath the altar. Photographs of the skeletal remains, the many Catherine Doyles, were sealed in secure evidence folders, each tagged with its date and inscription. But before the team could begin DNA analysis, an unmarked black sedan pulled up to the barricade. 3 men stepped out. Black suits, clerical collars, Vatican badges. The eldest introduced himself with calm authority. "Monsignor Pietro Vasari, Apostolic Delegate to the United States." "Detective Keene, we are here to assume jurisdiction over St. Mary's and its contents. This is now a matter of ecclesiastical investigation." Keene crossed her arms. "With all due respect, Monsignor, this is a criminal investigation on U.S. soil. Your jurisdiction ends where my badge begins." He smiled thinly. "Then perhaps you should understand. This badge answers to higher law." The tension between church and state was immediate, electric. Within hours, orders from Washington arrived: cooperate with Vatican officials to ensure diplomatic respect. Keene's hands were tied. By afternoon, Vatican archivists had begun cataloging the recovered relics, the tapes, photographs, and documents, each sealed in boxes marked Sacre Confidentia. But something about their efficiency unnerved her. They seemed to know exactly what to look for. When Keene confronted one of the assistants, he avoided her gaze and muttered in Italian, "They buried the truth once before. They'll do it again." That night, after the chapel was cleared, Keene snuck back inside with Ruiz. Together, they accessed the basement evidence room where the remaining files had been stored before Vatican custody. One folder remained uncollected. Inside were documents older than any other, handwritten letters and transcript from 1879, each signed Catherine Doyle. But one letter, brittle and yellowed, stood out. It was addressed not to the church, but to the future investigator who finds this place. The letter read, "If these words reach you, then you too have followed the hymns into silence. They will tell you I am dead. They will show you my bones. But I was not buried. I was sealed away. The custodians guard the faith, not from evil, but from exposure. Beneath St. Mary's lies not one secret, but many. Find the vault of the broken seal. There you will see their true sin." At the bottom, a crude map, identical to the catacomb layout, but with one section circled in red, the sacristy vault. Ruiz exhaled sharply. The vault. That's where the Vatican guys were earlier. Then we're going back, Keen said, before they erase whatever's in there. They returned to the chapel just before midnight. The main lights were off, but faint candlelight flickered under the sacristy door. Keen pushed it open carefully. The Vatican officials were gone, but the vault door stood ajar. Inside, several open crates revealed their contents: relics, ledgers, and photographs. But at the far end of the vault, one box was still sealed, labeled in red wax, Custodia Interna, non-aperior, do not open. Keen hesitated only for a moment before breaking the seal. Inside were hundreds of photographs, black and white, spanning decades. Each depicted young nuns standing before different churches, each labeled with a single name, Catherine Doyle. Different faces, same name. One photo in particular froze her. It was taken in 1994, the last year Sister Catherine vanished. She stood at the altar of St. Mary's beside Monsignor Harlan. But behind them, faintly visible through the stained glass, was a third figure, half shrouded in shadow. A man in priestly robes, eyes obscured, staring directly at the camera. When enhanced under the lab scanner later, the inscription on the back became visible. Father Alan Reese, final witness. Ruiz shook his head. It's the same name, Laura. He's been there the whole time. Keen's voice dropped. He's not one man. He's a title, just like Catherine Doyle. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The custodians didn't just erase people. They recycled identities. Each generation had its Catherine, its Alan, its silence. A ritual of replacement that kept the secret alive through centuries. As Keen gathered the files, the chapel's bells suddenly rang. Midnight mass, though the church was empty. Then her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. You've opened the wrong vault. Before she could react, the power in the chapel flickered. Every candle blew out, and from the darkness, a faint glow appeared near the altar, the ghostly outline of a woman in a nun's habit. Her face pale, eyes closed, hands clasped in prayer. Keen whispered, Catherine. The figure lifted her head, meeting Keen's gaze for the first time. They are coming. Do not let them name you. Then she vanished, leaving behind a single feather, scorched at the edges, lying atop the box. Ruiz backed away. We're in over our heads, Laura. This isn't a case anymore. It's a curse. Keen stared at the feather, her voice steady but haunted. Then we find out who wrote the curse. The Vault of the Broken Seal, Secrets of the Eternal Silence. The next day, the sky over Boston was dark, low, and heavy with rain. The air felt charged, as if even the weather sensed that something forbidden had been disturbed. Detective Laura Keen sat in her car outside St. Mary's, staring at the feather she'd found in the sacristy the night before. She turned it over in her hand. Charred edges, faint traces of wax and ash. Laboratory analysis confirmed it wasn't synthetic, it was real. From a dove burned in a place meant for prayer. It didn't make sense, yet somehow it fit everything else about this case. Faith twisted into silence. Purity scorched into secrecy. Her phone buzzed. It was Ruiz. Laura, you need to see this. Now, at the precinct, Ruiz spread out a series of documents on the conference table. Photocopies from the Custodia Interna file they'd recovered before the Vatican seized it. One page was a typed list of names, dozens of them, each labeled erased. And next to every erased name was a second, replaced by. Among them, Catherine Doyle, 1958, replaced by Laura Keen, 1971. She froze. What is this supposed to mean? Ruiz swallowed hard. It means you're next, Laura. Someone, somehow, had already chosen you. Her blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a blow. Every move she'd made, every discovery she thought she'd found by accident. Maybe it wasn't accident at all. Maybe she'd been led here. You think this was all planned? She whispered. I think it's bigger than either of us, Ruiz replied. And if that letter was right, there's one place left to look, the Vault of the Broken Seal. They traced its location to a decommissioned monastery 2 hours west of Boston, once owned by the same order that built St. Mary's. The monastery had been closed since the 1950s after reports of ritual irregularities. Keene and Ruiz arrived near dusk. The building loomed against the gray sky, its bell tower cracked, its cross half fallen. A faint smell of incense still lingered in the air, as if the prayers had never stopped. They broke the rusted lock and entered. The walls were lined with faded frescoes of saints, but their eyes had been scratched out. Deep inside, beneath the chapel, they found a stairwell descending into stone. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. At the bottom was a massive iron door. Across it, words painted in blood-red letters. Sigillum fractum non resealator. The broken seal must not be resealed. Ruiz muttered, "Well, that's comforting." They forced the door open. Inside was a long, narrow chamber filled with stone coffins arranged in perfect symmetry, 12 in total. On each coffin was engraved the name Catherine Doyle. But the final one, the 12th, was empty. And above it, carved into the wall, the words, "The next must witness." At the center of the room stood a massive altar made of black marble. Embedded within it was a circular seal, cracked down the middle, the broken seal. The seal pulsed faintly, as if light were trapped beneath it. Keene placed her flashlight over the crack, revealing fragments of parchment beneath the marble surface. Documents sealed into the altar itself. Ruiz helped her pry them free. They were fragile, handwritten, marked with the crest of the custodians. Translated, the documents read, "The seal was created to contain that which defied divine order. A voice unholy yet truthful." The first Catherine heard it. She spoke its words aloud. For that, she was buried where hymns end. The seal cannot be broken, for truth and heresy share the same tongue. Keene felt a chill crawl up her spine. So this is what they were hiding all along. A voice. Something they couldn't explain. Ruiz nodded. Or couldn't control. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The temperature dropped. And from somewhere inside the vault, the faint sound of chanting began. 12 voices, layered, echoing in perfect unison. The coffins trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then the altar cracked further, releasing a gust of air that extinguished their flashlights. From the darkness, a woman's voice emerged, soft, mournful, and familiar. "Laura, the truth will choose its vessel." It was Catherine. The voice grew louder, overlapping with others, dozens of women whispering the same words. Ruiz fumbled for his light, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here now." Keene stood frozen, staring at the altar. The light beneath the seal had grown brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's calling," she murmured. "It's been calling for years." A flash of blinding light filled the chamber. The whispering stopped. When the light faded, Keene was alone. Ruiz was gone. The coffins were sealed again. The altar was intact. No crack, no documents, no sign of disturbance. Only the 12th coffin now bore a new inscription. Laura Keene, 1971 to 1994. Her breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, her mind spinning. The date, 1994, the same year Catherine disappeared. Suddenly, she understood. The cycle hadn't ended. It had just chosen its next name. The seal didn't contain evil. It contained memory. Every Catherine, every disappearance, every erasure was the continuation of the same truth. The church's greatest secret wasn't what it hid, but what it kept repeating. She ran from the vault, up the stairs, through the ruined chapel, into the pouring rain. Her name echoing in her head like a curse she couldn't escape. Laura Keene, the next Catherine. When she reached the car, Ruiz's notebook lay on the seat. Inside it, one line written in fresh ink. "She's still in the vault." But when Keene turned to look back at the monastery, every window was dark. The door was gone, the building gone. Only an open field remained, covered in mist. And faintly, in the distance, the sound of a hymn fading into silence. The next Catherine, the cycle begins again. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. Boston lay under a gray shroud, as if mourning something it couldn't name. The news said nothing about the monastery. No reports of missing detectives. No mention of any sealed vault. For the rest of the world, the story of Sister Catherine Doyle had faded back into the archives, another unsolved disappearance. But for Detective Laura Keene, the nightmare had only just begun. She returned home that night, soaked to the bone, exhausted and silent. She'd driven aimlessly after escaping the vault, her mind a swirl of voices, memories, and impossible visions. But when she turned the key to her apartment, something felt wrong. The air inside was cold, not the kind of cold that comes from an open window, but the kind that breathes back. Her walls were covered in photographs, copies of old police reports, missing person flyers, the St. Mary's archives, all the evidence she'd gathered over the past few months. But tonight, the photos had changed. Every face, every nun, every witness, every priest now bore the same face. Catherine Doyle's. Her pulse raced. She stumbled backward, her eyes scanning the wall in disbelief. No, this isn't real. Then she saw her own photograph, her academy graduation picture, and beneath it, in red ink, the next must witness. The same words from a vault. Her phone rang. The caller ID read Ruiz. Hands trembling, she answered. Ruiz? Where are you? But the voice on the line wasn't Ruiz. It was her own. Laura Keene, the next Catherine. The call disconnected. By morning, she went to the precinct, hoping someone, anyone, could confirm Ruiz's existence. But when she asked for Detective Miguel Ruiz, the clerk frowned. There's no one by that name here. Keene slammed the desk. He's my partner. He worked the Doyle case with me. The officer hesitated. Detective, you've been working alone since you transferred here. There was no Doyle case. Her hand shook. She ran back to her desk. The case file was gone. The evidence board, empty. It was as if the entire investigation had been erased. Again. Only one thing remained. A sealed envelope with her name. Inside was a single black and white photograph. It showed Sister Catherine Doyle standing outside St. Mary's, smiling gently. But in the background, through the glass reflection of the chapel window, she saw her own face. Laura Keene's. Later that evening, desperate for answers, Keene drove to her childhood church, St. Helena's, where her late mother had once taken her to pray. Inside, the air was thick with candle smoke. The pews were empty, except for an elderly priest lighting candles at the altar. Father O'Malley, she called out. He turned, his face pale, trembling. Laura, I was wondering when they would send for you. Her stomach dropped. Send for me? The priest nodded. You're the 12th. The 12th what? She asked, voice breaking. He sighed, looking at her with weary sorrow. Each generation, the church selects a soul to bear the silence, the vessel through which the truth is carried forward. Sister Catherine was the 11th. You mean she was chosen? No, child, the priest whispered. She was consumed. She stepped back. You're telling me this has been happening for decades, centuries? Longer, he said softly, since the founding of the order. Every time one vanishes, another is called to witness. You can't fight it. It's already written. Keene's eyes filled with tears. I didn't ask for this. Neither did she. He reached into his robe and handed her a small silver pendant, a crucifix engraved with the symbol of the broken seal. If you go back to St. Mary's, you might still find the truth. But be warned, the truth never leaves without taking something in return. She turned the pendant over in her hand. The same Latin phrase was etched on the back. Sigillum fractum non resealatur. Her heart pounded. She knew what she had to do. That night, Keene drove back toward the ruins of St. Mary's. But when she arrived, there was no ruin, no empty field. The monastery stood intact, glowing softly under the moonlight, as if it had never disappeared. The bells began to toll. Midnight. The front doors creaked open, and waiting inside, at the foot of the altar, was Catherine Doyle, her face serene, her eyes hollow. You came, Catherine said softly. I was afraid you wouldn't. Keene's breath caught. You alive? Alive. Catherine smiled faintly. No. Remember, the truth doesn't die. It only finds new voices. Behind her, 12 shadowy figures emerged. Women in habits, faces obscured by veils. They circled Keene slowly, chanting in the same rhythm as the voices from the vault. Catherine extended her hand. It's your turn to witness, Laura. Keene backed away. "No, I'm ending this." She pulled out the pendant, clutching it tightly. The crucifix burned against her palm, glowing faintly. Catherine's expression softened. Endings are illusions. There are only beginnings again and again. The chanting grew louder. The ground trembled. Candles burst one by one. And as the final bell struck 12, Keene screamed. Not from pain, but from realization. Because in that moment, she remembered everything. Every disappearance. Every erased name. Every version of herself that had lived and died before. The truth wasn't in the vault. The truth was her. The cycle wasn't a curse. It was a covenant. A deal struck long ago to keep something greater contained. And as the light consumed her, she finally understood Catherine's last words. To vanish is to protect. To remain is to end the world. When the sun rose, St. Mary's was gone once more. Only a field of white lilies remained, and in the center, a single feather, charred at the edges. Boston police would later report another disappearance. Detective Laura Keene, last seen investigating a cold case at St. Mary's Convent. Her badge and notebook were recovered from the site. Inside the final page, one sentence written in her handwriting. The 12th has vanished. The seal remains. The keeper's record, the story that wouldn't stay buried. Boston, autumn of 1995. Nearly a year had passed since Detective Laura Keene's disappearance. Officially, her case was closed. Unofficially, it was buried. The church issued no statement. The police cited psychological breakdown and voluntary disappearance. But those who knew Keene refused to believe it. She was too meticulous, too grounded to simply vanish. Her apartment had been emptied by order of the Archdiocese, citing sensitive religious property. Her desk at the precinct reassigned. It was as if Laura Keene had never existed. But then, something strange began happening online. The digital leak. In early 1996, a digital archive appeared on an encrypted forum used by investigative journalists. It was titled simply, Custodia Interna /Record of Witnesses. The files contained scans of old Vatican correspondences, coded notes, and photographs, all referencing St. Mary's Convent, Boston. One image showed the vault, intact, with 12 names carved on the coffins. But in this version, the 12th name wasn't Laura Keene. It was Sister Catherine Doyle, 1994. The name had changed back, and in the metadata of each image, the uploader's ID read L.Keene_12. Investigators traced the IP address to a long-abandoned rectory in Charlestown. When journalists arrived, they found the building empty, save for a crucifix nailed upside down and a typewritten note left on the altar. The note read, "The record must remain. They will erase again. The keeper must always write." At the bottom, a single fingerprint, confirmed later by forensics to match Laura Keene. The press went wild for a week. But within days, the story was gone. Every article deleted, every journalist's draft corrupted. Web archives were wiped. Hard drives mysteriously failed. And the forum itself? Taken offline. Its founder later told the Boston Ledger. It was like the files deleted themselves, as if they didn't want to be seen. The church's response. Meanwhile, the Archdiocese released a quiet statement, buried in a local newspaper's religion section. The church grieves for all souls lost in faith and service. St. Mary's Convent remains closed for restoration and reflection. But leaked internal memos told another story. They spoke of a containment breach in an unlisted Boston site, and an order from Rome to reinstate Custodia Protocol 12 immediately. When asked for clarification, Vatican representatives refused to comment. A year later, St. Mary's was demolished. Locals said construction crews refused to work after discovering voices in the ground, whispers that rose through the soil when they dug too deep. The unmarked tape. In 1998, a Boston journalist named Dana Ellis received a padded envelope with no return address. Inside, a single VHS tape marked with a cross. The tape showed grainy footage of a woman, her face pale, her eyes hollow, speaking directly to the camera in what looked like an old rectory. She said only 6 words. "This is not my first life." Then the tape cut to static. Analysis confirmed it wasn't an actress. It was Laura Keene. The footage appeared authentic. The same scar above her right brow. The same silver pendant seen in old crime photos. But what truly unsettled investigators was the date stamp on the recording. April 14th, 1996, 5 months after her disappearance. And in the background, faint but audible, was the sound of 12 voices humming a hymn known only to one order, the Sisters of St. Mary's. The Keeper Theory. Researchers began to form a theory that the Keeper was not a person but a recurring consciousness. Each generation, a chosen vessel preserved the memory of the last, carrying forward the truth locked behind faith's facade. Some believe the Keeper was a divine role, others a punishment. One anonymous Vatican scholar described it in a leaked email. The Keeper bears both burden and blessing. To remember is to prevent the repetition. To forget is to invite the end. But the Church had spent centuries perfecting the art of forgetting. And each time the record resurfaced, it was erased. The new beginning. In 2005, St. Mary's land was sold to a private developer. Plans were approved to build a luxury residential complex named the Sanctum Residences. Construction began, but stopped halfway. Workers complained of power outages, shadows in the halls, whispers under the foundation. Cameras caught strange anomalies, flickers of movement where no one stood, faint silhouettes in the background of security feeds. And one night, a guard found a small stone plaque beneath the soil. It bore one name, Laura Keene. The following morning, the foreman quit. The project was abandoned. Today, the site stands empty, fenced off, locked, untouchable. Locals call it the Lot of Voices. And sometimes, at night, passers-by say they hear faint chanting, 12 women in harmony, repeating the same phrase. The Keeper remembers. The legacy. So what really happened to Sister Catherine Doyle? To Laura Keene? Were they victims of institutional silence, or guardians of something far beyond mortal comprehension? All we know is this. Every time the Church erases the record, the same story returns, in letters, in recordings, in names that shouldn't exist. The Keeper's hand writes again, reminding us that faith, once weaponized, never forgets its victims. And somewhere, beyond the veil of memory and time, 12 voices keep singing, keeping the silence alive. Erasure Protocol, the architects of silence. It was 2010 when a former archivist from the Vatican's Apostolic Library came forward. He called himself Father Angelo Ferraro, though it was unclear if that was his real name. In a private interview with investigative reporter Dana Ellis, the same journalist who once received Laura Keene's mysterious tape, he said one phrase that reshaped the entire St. Mary's mystery. You can't find Catherine Doyle because she was never meant to exist. Ferraro's words weren't metaphor. They were policy. He revealed the existence of a covert division buried within the Vatican bureaucracy, a unit known as Custodia Interna, or internal custody. Its mission? Not to protect the Church from evil, but to contain inconvenient miracles. The origin of the order. The Custodia Interna traced its roots back to 1852, when the Church faced growing panic over unexplained phenomena among nuns across Europe. Visions, voices, spontaneous bleeding, prophetic utterances. Rather than dismiss them as heresy, the Vatican chose to manage them. A secret council, the Architects of Silence, was formed. Their task: identify and isolate resonant vessels, individuals capable of channeling something the Church called a continuum. To the world, these women became saints, martyrs, or when they refused control, disappeared. The first recorded erasure took place in Lyon, France, 1856, when Sister Amélie Laurent vanished after claiming to hear God beneath the altar. From then on, every 50 years, one new name would surface, a woman who carried the same pattern, the same visions, the same voice. And every time, she vanished. The last on record before the digital age was Catherine Doyle, 1994. The pattern was clear. Each vessel was chosen long before birth. Their names appeared in the Archivum Sigillum, a secret register hidden beneath the Vatican. And each generation, the Church enacted what it called Erasure Protocol 13. Its purpose? To erase the vessel's existence from public record, replacing it with an alternate identity, then initiating containment, often through disappearance. The investigator's fate. Laura Keene's name, Ferraro claimed, was entered into the archivum decades before she ever joined the Boston Police Department. The investigation she believed she'd chosen had, in truth, chosen her. She wasn't following the case, Ferraro said. The case was following her. He explained that the Custodia Interna operated through keepers, priests and nuns trained to maintain the cycle. Their task was not to kill, but to preserve balance. Each vessel must vanish before she speaks the full truth. If the voice completes its cycle, the silence breaks. When Ellis asked what that meant, Ferraro replied quietly, "If the silence breaks, God will have to answer." The Black Registry. In 2012, Ferraro smuggled out a fragment of the Archivum Sigillum, a thin leather-bound booklet containing faded names and handwritten annotations. 12 names were listed, from Amélie Laurent in 1856 to Catherine Doyle in 1994. But below Catherine's entry, a 13th line had been added in darker ink. L. Keene, status, unresolved/vessel retained. The note beside it read, "Cycle reinitiated." Witness continues. Ellis published portions of the document online. Within 48 hours, her website was hacked, her backups erased, and Father Ferraro was found dead in Rome, officially from cardiac arrest. But autopsy photos later leaked anonymously showed marks around his throat, not consistent with heart failure. The repeated voice. Months later, the Vatican released a statement dismissing the Custodia Interna as a fabrication. But the damage was done. Podcasts, independent investigators, and dark web researchers began connecting strange dots. Unexplainable disappearances of nuns, archivists, and investigators who had looked into spiritual anomalies. All connected to a single Latin phrase, sigillum fractum non resealatur. In one leaked recording, supposedly from a Vatican emergency session, an unidentified cardinal could be heard saying, "We cannot reseal what he has already broken. The 13th has remembered." The keeper writes again. The implication was staggering, that somewhere the cycle had restarted. And if the 13th vessel was active, the Church's old control mechanisms were failing. The echo returns. By 2013, new anomalies surfaced across Massachusetts. A group of theology students reported a woman visiting their campus library at night, pale, soft-spoken, wearing an outdated Boston PD badge. When asked her name, she replied, "Detective Keene. I'm just checking the records." Security footage later confirmed a figure entering the library at 11:41 p.m. But at 11:42, the camera glitched, and the footage resumed at 11:44, showing an empty hallway. No one entered or left. The only sign she'd been there was a note left on the librarian's desk. "Erase nothing. Keep the record." The librarian, unnerved, later found a small silver pendant beneath the chair. The same pendant Keene wore the night she disappeared. The architect's fall. In 2015, the Vatican announced a formal restructuring. Several heritage preservation offices were quietly dissolved, including Custodia Interna. But insiders said this was a cover, a symbolic burial for an order that had outlived its purpose. For the first time in centuries, the Church admitted it had contained manifestations beyond its understanding. It was, in its own way, an apology delivered without confession. One anonymous letter from within the clergy read, "We silenced miracles to protect belief, but belief has turned against us. The keeper no longer obeys." That letter was signed only A.F. Father Angelo Ferraro, meaning whoever sent it after his death. The Whisper Network. Today, traces of the Custodia Interna survive only in fragments, encoded prayers, archived confessions, and a scattering of forbidden texts across online databases. But occasionally, a new file appears, uploaded from nowhere, time-stamped decades before. They all contain the same final message. There will always be a 13th. The story of St. Mary's isn't just about one missing nun or one detective who vanished. It's about a system built on the idea that truth can be erased, holiness can be controlled, and memory can be rewritten. But as history shows, every erased story finds its way back, through whispers, through ghosts, through keepers who refuse to forget. And tonight, as you listen, somewhere in a locked archive beneath Rome, a record is still writing itself, one line at a time. A quill moves in the dark. A candle burns low, and the 13th name waits to be written. The last record, the keeper's final testimony. For nearly 2 decades, the story of the missing nun and the vanished detective was treated as myth. A cautionary tale, a dark echo of faith turned to silence. But in the spring of 2024, something surfaced that forced the Vatican and the world to look again. It began with a discovery inside the secret archives of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Rome. A digital restoration project had unearthed a misfiled document, its parchment sealed with crimson wax and marked sigillum fractum. Its title, Testimonium Ultimum, the Final Witness. Inside were 40 handwritten pages and a single photograph. The handwriting matched that of Detective Laura Keene. The photograph showed her standing outside St. Mary's Convent, Boston, smiling faintly, the crucifix visible around her neck. The back of the photo bore one phrase in Latin, Memoria est salus, memory is salvation. The testimony, Keene's account, written in fragmented sentences and dates that made no chronological sense, appeared to be both confession and warning. It began, "If you're reading this, the silence has already failed. They'll come again to erase. Don't let them. Record everything." She described the vault of the broken seal, the 12 coffins, the light beneath the altar, the whispering voices. But her writing changed as it went on, growing softer, more reflective, as if she were speaking not as a detective, but as something else. I understand now. The vault isn't a prison. It's a promise. We keep what the church cannot face, the voice that questions, the truth that burns too bright. Catherine wasn't taken. She was transformed. Each of us holds the fragment of a truth too large for one soul. When the 12th fades, the next awakens. We are memory made flesh. On the final page, her words became almost prayer-like. Tell them faith without truth is only fear. Tell them silence has never been holy. Tell them, I remember. And beneath her signature, one final line. The keeper rests when the world listens. The last voice. When the document leaked to the press, Vatican officials issued a rare public acknowledgement. The Custodia Interna was a historical containment order disbanded in the 20th century. Certain records were destroyed for the safety of faith. But outside the church, theologians, journalists, and skeptics began connecting the dots. 12 women over 2 centuries, each marked by the same pattern of visions and disappearance, each linked by a shared voice. And then, something remarkable happened. A series of encrypted emails began circulating among investigative circles, each containing a voice recording. The voice was female, calm, familiar. This is Laura Keene. If you're hearing me, the keeper's work continues. You are now part of the record. Experts authenticated the voice. It matched the audio from her 1996 VHS tape, identical in tone, inflection, and cadence. But the metadata showed something impossible. The recordings were created in 2023, nearly 30 years after she vanished. The connection revealed. Scholars finally traced the chain of names, dates, and archives across continents, and uncovered what the church had tried to conceal for centuries. Every vessel, every Catherine, every vanished woman shared one genetic trait, mitochondrial DNA from a single bloodline originating in 17th century Ireland. The line belonged to Mother Elise Doyle, a nun excommunicated in 1648 for claiming she could speak with angels beneath the altar. Her bloodline continued in secret, and among her descendants, Sister Catherine Doyle and Detective Laura Keene. The keepers were not chosen by chance. They were descendants of the first woman who refused to be silenced. A prophecy written in her final sermon read, "When the 12th returns, the seal shall fracture. The 13th will not vanish. She will speak, and all silence will end. The return. 1 year after the leak of Testimonium Ultimum, a new video appeared on a private encrypted server used by religious historians. It showed the ruins of St. Mary's, overgrown, silent, and illuminated only by moonlight. A woman walked into frame, dressed in black, barefoot, carrying a lantern. She turned to the camera. It was unmistakably Laura Keene. Unaged, her eyes steady, her face serene. "You wanted the truth," she said. "You buried it for centuries. You called it heresy. You called it sin. But the voice you feared was never against God. It was God. Faith without memory is corruption. Faith without truth is control. But I have remembered for all of us." Behind her, 12 faint silhouettes appeared. The lost nuns, the erased women, the voices the church had tried to silence. Catherine Doyle stood closest, her hand on Keene's shoulder. "We are not miracles," Keene whispered. "We are history." Then the video faded to static. The aftermath. Within weeks, religious institutions worldwide began receiving anonymous shipments, USB drives containing the full Testimonium Ultimum, along with hundreds of pages of historical data proving the existence of the Custodia Interna. Public reaction was divided. Some dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. Others called it the Church's greatest reckoning. But something else happened too. Across cities and continents, people reported dreams, visions of a woman whispering in candlelight, repeating the same phrase in Latin. Memoria est salus. Memory is salvation. And every time someone woke, they found a single white feather beside their bed, charred at the edges. The final truth. In the end, no one ever found Laura Keene's body. No one could prove the video was real. But the silence that once protected the church began to fracture, slowly, irreversibly. At the rebuilt St. Mary's site in Boston, a small memorial stands today for the women who remembered. Every year, on April 14th, the day both Catherine and Laura vanished, candles appear at the gates. No one sees who leaves them. And if you stand there long enough, when the wind is still, you can hear faint voices singing in the distance, 12 in harmony, one leading softly. The keeper rests when the world listens. Epilogue, voiceover. The vanishing at St. Mary's was never about one nun or one detective. It was about a system built on silence, and the people brave enough to break it. Centuries tried to bury the truth, but the truth learned to whisper. And from those whispers came memory, from memory came voice, and from voice came freedom. Because faith without memory is blindness. And sometimes the only way to save belief is to remember what it tried to forget. If you've stayed with us through this haunting journey, thank you. Your curiosity keeps stories like this alive. Share your thoughts below, tell us what you believe happened, and help us uncover more forgotten truths. Your voice matters because silence ends with you.